Preparing for a project manager at Bank of America interview. You've reached Candy Mentor, and this video is for you. We'll walk through 20 key questions you're likely to face. For each question, you'll see a sample answer followed by the key points to cover. Subscribe, like, and share, and drop a topic request in the comments. Question 1. Tell me about yourself and why you want to be a project manager at Bank of America. I have built my career around leading cross-functional projects where execution discipline and stakeholder alignment matter. In banking, project management is not just about timelines. It is about controls, risk, client experience, and operational resilience. Bank of America appeals to me because of its scale, strong governance culture, and focus on responsible growth. I would bring structured planning, clear communication, and a bias for solving issues early, before they affect delivery. While answering, connect your project delivery experience to banking priorities, risk management, client impact, regulatory discipline, technology change, stakeholder coordination, and Bank of America's scale, controls-focused culture, and responsible growth mindset. Question 2. How do you manage a project from initiation through closure? I start by clarifying the business objective, success metrics, scope, stakeholders, assumptions, and constraints. Then I build the plan, milestones, dependencies, budget, resources, risks, and governance cadence. During execution, I track progress against baseline, manage risks and issues, and communicate transparently. Before implementation, I confirm testing, controls, approvals, and readiness. At closure, I validate benefits, document lessons learned, and ensure ownership transfers cleanly to operations. Make sure to cover the full life cycle: business case, scope, governance, planning, execution, risk and issue tracking, testing, implementation, benefits tracking, lessons learned, and formal closure documentation. Question 3. How would you handle a project where senior stakeholders disagree on priorities? I would first separate opinion from decision criteria. I would meet key stakeholders to understand their goals, constraints, and risk concerns, then bring the group back to a fact-based discussion. In a bank, I would weigh regulatory deadlines, client impact, operational risk, cost, and strategic value. If alignment still was not possible, I would escalate with clear options and implications. The key is keeping decisions documented and the project moving. In your answer, talk about active listening, decision criteria, business impact, regulatory urgency, cost-benefit trade-offs, facilitation, escalation paths, and documenting decisions to maintain accountability and momentum. Question 4. Describe a time you delivered a project under a tight deadline. In one project, we had 6 weeks to implement a process change before a client reporting deadline. I broke the work into critical and non-critical paths, created a daily stand-up, and secured fast decisions from business, technology, and operations leads. We reduced scope only where it did not affect compliance or client outcomes. The project went live on time with no major defects, and the lesson was simple: urgency works only when governance stays clear. Be sure to mention the situation, deadline pressure, trade-offs, prioritization, communication rhythm, resource management, risk controls, measurable outcome, and what you learned about disciplined execution under pressure. Question 5. How do you manage risk in a banking project? Risk management starts during planning, not when something breaks. I identify risks across scope, schedule, technology, operations, compliance, vendor dependency, and change adoption. Each risk gets an owner, probability, impact, mitigation, trigger, and escalation path. In a banking environment, I pay special attention to regulatory commitments, data quality, access controls, client impact, and operational continuity. I review the risk log regularly and make sure leadership sees emerging issues early. While answering, focus on proactive identification, risk registers, impact and probability scoring, mitigation owners, control requirements, regulatory exposure, operational resilience, escalation discipline, and frequent review throughout the project lifecycle. Question 6. How do you decide whether to use Agile, Waterfall, or a hybrid approach? I choose the method based on risk, clarity, and delivery needs. If requirements are stable and approvals are formal, Waterfall can work well. If the solution needs discovery, user feedback, and iterative builds, Agile is better. In banking, I often prefer hybrid. Agile delivery teams with waterfall-style governance, documentation, risk checkpoints, and implementation controls that give speed without losing traceability, auditability, or stakeholder confidence. Make sure to cover project uncertainty, regulatory documentation needs, technology delivery model, stakeholder availability, testing requirements, release cadence, and why many financial services projects use hybrid governance. Question 7. What project metrics would you track for leadership reporting? For leadership, I keep reporting concise but decision-oriented. I track milestone status, budget versus forecast, scope changes, key risks, open issues, dependency health, testing progress, defect trends, and implementation readiness. I also include benefits tracking, especially if the project promises cost savings, revenue enablement, risk reduction, or client experience improvement. The best dashboard does not just say green or red, it explains what decision or support is needed. In your answer, talk about schedule, budget, scope, benefits, risks, issues, dependencies, quality, testing progress, change requests, resource capacity, readiness, and executive-level red, amber, green status reporting. Question 8. How would you manage scope creep on a Bank of America project? I manage scope creep by making the baseline visible from the start. When a new request comes in, I do not reject it automatically. I assess business value, regulatory need, cost, timeline impact, resource impact, and risk. Then I route it through change control with clear options: accept, defer, swap, or reject. In a large bank, informal scope changes are dangerous because they can affect controls, testing, funding, and downstream operations. Be sure to mention baseline scope, change control, impact assessment, stakeholder education, prioritization, regulatory versus discretionary requirements, budget and timeline implications, and formal approval before accepting changes. Question 9. Tell me about a time a project was going off track. What did you do? On a systems enhancement project, defect volume started rising 2 weeks before user acceptance testing was due to finish. I paused new enhancement work, grouped defects by root cause, and created a recovery plan with technology, QA, and business owners. I escalated the timeline risk early and reset expectations with facts. We added targeted testing support, resolved critical defects first, and delivered 1 week later than planned, but avoided a poor quality release. While answering, use a structured story. Early warning signs, root cause analysis, corrective plan, stakeholder communication, escalation, revised forecast, accountability, and measurable recovery outcome. Question 10. How do you communicate with executives versus working level teams? Executives need clarity, not every detail. I focus on status, key risks, decisions needed, financial or client impact, and whether the project remains aligned to strategy. Working teams need more detail: tasks, blockers, dependencies, owners, and deadlines. I keep the message consistent, but change the level of detail. That prevents confusion and builds trust, because everyone hears the same facts in a format they can act on. Make sure to cover audience awareness, message tailoring, concise executive summaries, detailed working sessions, risks and decisions, transparency, cadence, and avoiding unnecessary technical detail for senior stakeholders. Question 11. How would you approach a regulatory or compliance-driven project? For a regulatory project, I start by confirming the obligation, deadline, impacted processes, and interpretation with compliance, legal, risk, and business owners. Then I translate the requirement into deliverables, controls, evidence, and testing criteria. I keep documentation tight because auditability matters. I also avoid treating the date as flexible unless leadership confirms otherwise. The goal is not only to implement a change, but to prove it was implemented effectively. In your answer, talk about deadline certainty, interpretation alignment, legal and compliance input, control design, evidence, documentation, testing, audit trail, stakeholder ownership, and consequences of missed regulatory commitments. Question 12. How do you manage dependencies across technology, operations, finance, risk, and business teams? Dependencies can quietly become the biggest delivery risk, so I make them explicit. I map each dependency to an owner, due date, deliverable, upstream impact, and downstream impact. Then I review them in governance meetings and separately with owners when needed. For example, a technology release may depend on data mapping from operations and approval from risk. If one slips, I update the critical path and escalate before the delay becomes irreversible. Be sure to mention dependency mapping, ownership, dates, critical path, cross-functional governance, escalation, impact analysis, integrated planning, and frequent follow-up to prevent silent delays. Question 13. What tools and documentation do you typically use to manage projects? I use tools based on the delivery environment. For Agile teams, Jira and Confluence are useful for backlog, sprint, and documentation management. For executive reporting, PowerPoint and Excel are still effective. For formal planning, I use Microsoft Project or similar tools to manage milestones and dependencies. More important than the tool is the discipline. A clear charter, RAID log, decision log, status report, and single source of truth. While answering, mention tools without sounding tool-dependent. Microsoft Project, Jira, Confluence, SharePoint, Excel, PowerPoint, RAID logs, status reports, project charters, stakeholder maps, and governance decks. Question 14. How do you handle budget management on a project? I manage budget by setting a clear baseline and comparing actuals, forecasts, and committed spend throughout the project. I look at internal resource cost, vendor cost, licensing, testing, implementation, and contingency. If a variance appears, I identify whether it is timing, scope, rate, or productivity driven. I also connect spend to benefits, because leadership needs to know whether the project still makes financial sense after changes. Make sure to cover baseline budget, forecast updates, actuals tracking, resource costs, vendor spend, change requests, variance explanations, benefits realization, and timely escalation of funding risks. Question 15. How would you lead a project team when you do not directly manage the team members? Most project managers lead through influence, not direct authority. I start by clarifying the goal, roles, decision rights, and expectations. Then I build credibility by removing blockers, communicating clearly, and respecting subject matter expertise. If commitments slip, I address it directly with facts and impact, not emotion. Escalation is a tool, but not the first tool. People follow a PM when they believe the structure helps them succeed. In your answer, talk about influence without authority, clear roles, shared goals, accountability, relationship building, transparency, problem-solving support, recognition, escalation only when necessary, and trust-based leadership. Question 16. How do you manage change adoption after a project goes live? A project is not successful just because it goes live. I plan adoption early by identifying impacted users, process changes, training needs, communication channels, and readiness criteria. Before launch, I confirm procedures, support model, and business ownership. After launch, I use hypercare to track incidents, user questions, and performance metrics. If adoption is weak, I treat it as a delivery issue, not a user problem. Be sure to mention stakeholder impact assessment, training, communications, readiness checks, pilot groups, operating procedures, hypercare, feedback loops, metrics, and ensuring the business owns the post-implementation process. Question 17. Describe how you would manage a third-party vendor in a banking project. Vendor management requires structure and control. I would confirm deliverables, timelines, acceptance criteria, service levels, security requirements, data handling rules, and escalation paths upfront. During execution, I would hold regular governance meetings, track actions, review risks, and validate progress against contract commitments. In a bank, I would also coordinate with procurement, information security, legal, and third-party risk teams. A vendor is external, but the accountability for delivery remains internal. While answering, focus on vendor selection support, contracts, deliverables, service levels, information security, data privacy, dependency management, governance meetings, issue escalation, and acceptance criteria before payment or sign-off. Question 18. How do you ensure data quality and control integrity in a project? Data quality has to be designed into the project, not checked at the end. I start by identifying critical data elements: owners, source systems, transformations, and downstream users. Then I define validation rules, reconciliations, exception handling, and access controls. Testing should include both functional outcomes and data integrity checks. In banking, poor data can create reporting errors, client issues, or regulatory exposure, so control evidence matters. Make sure to cover data lineage, validation rules, reconciliations, ownership, access controls, testing, exception handling, audit evidence, and the importance of reliable data in banking decisions and reporting. Question 19. How would you prioritize multiple projects or work streams at the same time? I prioritize by impact and constraint. Regulatory deadlines, client impact, operational risk, revenue impact, and executive commitments usually come first. Then I look at resource availability, dependencies, and whether delaying one work stream creates a larger downstream risk. I avoid pretending everything is equally urgent. If capacity is constrained, I present trade-offs clearly: what can be accelerated, what must move, and what risk leadership is accepting. In your answer, talk about business value, regulatory urgency, client impact, risk reduction, resource constraints, dependencies, executive priorities, transparent trade-offs, and maintaining realistic commitments across competing demands. Question 20. Why should Bank of America hire you as a project manager? Bank of America should hire me because I combine structured project management with practical business judgment. I know how to build plans, manage risks, communicate with senior leaders, and keep cross-functional teams aligned. I also understand that in banking, speed has to be balanced with controls, auditability, and client impact. My strength is bringing order to complexity and helping teams deliver outcomes that are measurable, sustainable, and well-governed. Be sure to summarize your delivery discipline: stakeholder management, risk mindset, banking or financial services awareness, communication strength, adaptability, and ability to execute change in a large, matrixed organization. If you are still with us, congratulations. You are much ahead of the rest and serious about preparing for your interview. We hope we were able to add value to your preparation and create some helpful content. Do not forget to like and share this video. Your small act can do great things for us.